my privilege, and I'm excited to introduce to you Dr. Lou Markos, our keynote, who will be speaking with us today. He is professor of English and scholar in residence at Houston Baptist University, where he holds the Robert H. Ray Chair in Humanities. His 22 books include Restoring Beauty, The Good, the True, and the Beautiful in the Writings of C.S. Lewis, The Worldwide Guide to Homer's Odyssey, Atheism on Trial, The Dreaming Stone, and many others. And we have on our book table some books by him, The Shoulders of Hobbits, which is another one of Lou's book. Lou is a very popular teacher at Houston Baptist University, but also speaks across the country to schools. So I now welcome Dr. Lou Markos.
Thank you all. It is great to be here, and I'm so excited that I was preceded by Bob Stacy. He was our original director of the Honors College, so he was my boss and got me in the Honors College, and I still teach in the Honors College alongside Winston's wife, Barbara, who's also here. And since once I get started, I'll forget to tell you this. If you're interested in what I say today and you're free tonight, come to HBU. I'm giving one of my Honors Scholars lectures from 4:45 to 6:15. And I'm lecturing on the British Middle Ages, and my focus is the Magna Carta, which is pretty important for the Free Enterprise Institute. So if you're on campus, I'm in Dillon 1, that's in the Hinton building, from 4:45 to 6:15. Do come by. I'm so glad to have Stuart Morris here. One of the things I love to tell Stuart Morris is if it wasn't for him, I would probably still be a Yankee. I hate to admit it, I grew up in New Jersey. I'm a proud son of Texas now, but I probably wouldn't have come here if Houston Baptist wasn't down here. So please come visit us at HBU. I've got so much to say, I'm not even going to worry about a joke. I just want to dive in. Let me get a little closer to you here. If you had asked me 10 years ago, what is the major problem with public education in the United States of America, I would have said the major problem is that we've thrown out virtue out of the public schools. That's what I used to think until I started to really investigate and listen and look and read. The problem with the public school is not that we've thrown out virtue. It would have been better if that's what they did. What they really did is they threw out the traditional virtues and substituted them with pseudo-virtues. If you go to the public schools, and also to most universities today, there's only 5 virtues that you will be taught. And those virtues are tolerance, inclusivism, egalitarianism, multiculturalism, and environmentalism. Now, I'm not saying those are evil things. We should take care of the environment. We should be tolerant to one another. But that is not the center of virtue, and it never has been. These are pseudo-virtues that are taking the place of the real virtues. What's the problem? The problem is that we are naturally moral, ethical creatures who want to be virtuous. Yes, we're fallen, but we were meant for virtue. And what happens is, if the public schools had just thrown out virtue, we might have recognized the gaping hole. But what happens is, by filling it up with pseudo-virtues, it makes us think we're doing okay. This may sound facetious, but it's very true. We're raising a generation of people that say, well, yeah, I do sleep around, but I recycle cans, and so it's okay. Now, I wish I was exaggerating there, but I'm not. What we've done is we've thrown out the sins against morality, and we've replaced them with what you might call sins against equality. Now, again, I'm not saying tolerance is a bad thing. But when you put that at the center, you will be willing to break all of the real virtues in order to serve the pseudo ones. Now, so far I sound like a pretty regular conservative speaker. And I could go on for the next 30 minutes on the attack and making fun of this. But that's not what I'm going to do today. Because the best offense, as they say in sports, is the best defense is a strong offense. As conservatives, we have to stop only complaining and say what we don't like. We need to say what we like. The best way to get rid of pseudo-virtues is not to always be attacking them. The best way to get rid of pseudo-virtues is to bring back the real virtues and make them exciting. Make young people want to embody real virtues, and then they won't be fooled by the pseudo-virtues. One of the reasons that my kids don't listen to lousy music is because when the kids were growing up, I always listened to good music with them. And that doesn't just mean classical music. We listen to Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald. We listen to good Broadway music. We listen to good Disney music. We listen to things, and what happened is I never had to tell them, shut off that crap, because they got an internal censor and knew what was good and what was bad. So what we need to do this morning is give a vision of what virtue means. Do you know what the best method is to get rid of weeds in your garden? The best method of getting rid of weeds is not to pour weed killer all over your garden. The best way to get rid of weeds is to grow very, very healthy grass. If your grass is healthy and strong, the weeds will not sprout up there. So what we're going to do this morning is go back to a traditional understanding of virtue. And before the modern period, if you asked anybody, what are the central virtues, they would have told you that there are 7 central virtues. There are 4 classical virtues, and there are 3 theological virtues. Now, what's the difference between the two? If you go back to the Middle Ages, they will explain to you the difference is that to understand the 4 classical or cardinal virtues, all you need is access to the natural law, to general revelation. All people have access to understanding and even embodying the 4 classical virtues, even if they don't have the Bible, even if they don't have direct revelation. It's written in our conscience, and we have access to it. And if you're conservative and you don't know the phrase natural law, then shame on you. Because the natural law is what allows us to have a virtuous public sphere without necessarily having, quote, a theocracy, right? You don't have to be a Christian to have access to the basic understanding of virtue that even virtuous pagans like Plato and Aristotle and Cicero had access to. Now, when we talk of the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, as Paul discusses in 1 Corinthians 13, now we're moving into an area that necessitates more special revelation. The Bible, the prophets, Christ himself. This morning, I'm just going to focus on the 4 classical virtues. And everything I'm going to tell you today, you can find it by reading 2 of the great books that they teach at St. Constantine and that we read again in the Honors College many times. One is Plato's Republic. In Plato's Republic, he lays out and defines all 4 of these virtues, and then his pupil Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics also defines and helps us to understand what they are. What are they? There is courage, or in Latin we use the word fortitude. There is self-control, or in Latin temperance. Then there is wisdom, or prudence. And then there is justice, which is already a Latin word, justitia. Those are the 4 classical virtues that were embodied by people like Plato and Aristotle, and that our founding fathers looked to as they established a virtuous nation. What I'm going to do this morning is take you as quickly as I can through those 4 virtues, and I'm going to try to define them, and I'm also going to try to illustrate them by making reference to the Lord of the Rings. Do we have any Lord of the Rings fans here? Book, movie, or something, okay? Because that is one of the modern books that embodies these virtues in an exciting way. And even though you look at England and think of it as a post-Christian country, about 10 years ago, when they took a poll of the British reading public, and the British people really read, okay? When they took a poll of what was the greatest book of the century, overwhelmingly they chose Lord of the Rings, which really embarrassed the British literati. So they took the poll again, and once again, Lord of the Rings was on the top. And I believe that Lord of the Rings is so popular because it's a sort of stealth virtue book. You think you're reading about, fantasy and all this sort of stuff and swords and whatnot. But actually undergirding that work are these classical virtues. Now, there is no official ordering of the classical virtues. It's not like Paul, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. There is no official order. But I'm going to begin with courage, because Tolkien's friend C.S. Lewis made a very good argument. He said, in some ways, courage is the most important virtue, because if you don't have courage, you can't practice any of the other virtues. After all, Pontius Pilate was merciful until it got costly, and then he turned Christ over. Right? So if you don't have courage, you will cave in and you will give up on all the virtues. So let's begin with courage, something our country needs now more than ever. When most of us think of courage, our first image is of a soldier charging into battle. Now, of course, it takes a lot of courage to be a soldier. But to me, the best way of explaining to you what courage is endurance. One thing that drives people crazy when they read Lord of the Rings or even when they watch the movie is how much walking those characters do. They never stop walking, right? One of my favorite songwriters, Frank Lesser, he's the guy who wrote the Guys and Dolls, he wrote an old song for World War I. What do you do in the infantry? You know what the answer is? You march, you march, you march, okay? You keep going, you endure, you hold on. In the Republic, Plato uses a wonderful metaphor to explain what courage is. Courage is like a color-fast dye, to use our modern language. Did you ever buy a cheap shirt from somewhere? Like maybe it's red, and every time you wash it, it keeps bleeding, okay? A true color-fast color, no matter how many times you wash it, it's not going to bleed out. It's going to hold its color. And courage endures. It doesn't give up. It doesn't get disintegrated in the washing machine. It holds on and it stays true. Now, unfortunately, because so many of us know about how Brutus and Cassius committed suicide, and also we've all seen The Godfather, we have this idea that the Romans were fascinated with suicide. Well, there are some suicides, but Rome's greatest moralist, Cicero, and their other moralists were not advocates of suicide, okay? It's kind of unfair that we have this idea of them all wanting to kill themselves. Now, why was Cicero against suicide? Well, he didn't have the revelation of the Bible. Suicide wasn't wrong because God created us and life is a gift and we owe it to God. He didn't have that fuller revelation. But Cicero understood natural law, and he understood that the problem with suicide is that killing yourself is abandoning your post. And if you have courage, you will stick to your post no matter the danger. Now, we can all understand a soldier at the post. That's where the metaphor comes from. But if you're any kind of a teacher, you need to stay at your post. If you're a doctor or a nurse, you need to stand at your post no matter how scared you are, no matter how much blood there is, no matter how much disease there is. If you're a homeschooling mom, you've got to stay at your post, because that may be the scariest thing of all. You need to stay at your post and not break and run. Courage doesn't mean you're never afraid. Courage means even though I'm afraid, I stay at my post and I don't run away. Sometimes we think of courage as self-glorification. What courage really is being willing to be the bridge over which others cross. Maybe the most important line in all of the Lord of the Rings, and the movie is faithful to this, comes at the very end. If you don't know the Lord of the Rings, Frodo has done this incredibly painful journey to bring the ring to Mordor and destroy it and allow freedom to come back to Middle-earth. And at the end of the book, he goes back to the Shire, that's the place where he lives, but he can't stay there anymore. He's got to leave. And when his friend Sam says, "Why are you leaving?" he says, "Sam, we set out to save the Shire, and it has been saved, but not for me." One of the things our country has lost is a sense of memory. Right? Because all of us at some point are immigrants. In my case, my 4 grandparents came from Greece. And we used to understand that our relatives who came here sacrificed a great deal, not just for themselves, but for their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. They had the courage to be the bridge over which other people cross, to help young people, as we've talked about so much, to help students. We need to be that bridge, and we can't be afraid. And you know what? Courage doesn't just mean jumping in front of a bullet. Sometimes it takes more courage to allow yourself to be humiliated and be embarrassed because you're standing for morality or truth or goodness or beauty, right? You know, this sounds kind of strange, but there are probably lots of Christians in this room who, if somebody came in and said, deny your faith, you might jump in and get shot, right? You have that courage. I think I've got that courage. But if we're in the office and people are making fun of those virtuous people, we're too afraid to speak up. Isn't that strange? And I say a lot of people who would have the courage to stand in front of a bullet would not have the courage to be embarrassed, right, and risk that. Because we're Americans and we don't like cognitive dissonance. So you need to have courage to stand up for what is right and good and true and holy. All right, let's move to the second one, temperance. Now, many of you have heard this before. The way that Aristotle defines virtue in the Nicomachean Ethics is virtue is the mean between the extremes. Now, what did he mean by that? It's also known as the golden mean. Unfortunately, in our country, a lot of people misunderstand that. I meet a lot of people who think the golden mean means, well, I'll try anything once. That's not virtue, that's stupidity. You're going to try arsenic once, okay? That is not what it means. It's not that YOLO thing, you only live once, try everything, okay? There are certain things you should not try. There are certain things you should run away from. Sometimes courage actually means running away in the right thing. Joseph ran away when Potiphar's wife went after him. Not because he lacked courage, but because his courage was tempered by temperance, and he knew that there is a time to run. Right? If you know about the Lord of the Rings, there's one character named Faramir who's never tempted by the ring. Well, he is in the movie. But in the book, he's never tempted because he says, if I saw it on the highway, I wouldn't pick it up. He knows that there are some dangers from which a man must run. So courage and temperance go together. Now, this mean between the extremes, what it means is that virtue is the middle point between the two extremes. So courage, the virtue of courage, obviously courage is not cowardice, that's over here. But courage is also not impulsive bravado that rushes in without thinking. Any classical person will tell you being a berserker is not courage, okay? And the military doesn't particularly like berserkers. Only people watching movies like berserkers. They're going to, and come in screaming. That's not courage. That's rashness and impulsiveness. Courage works with temperance and wisdom. In the same way, temperance is the mean between an extreme of asceticism and an extreme of sort of excess. Unfortunately, in our country, when you use the word temperance, it's kind of confusing. Because what does temperance mean to an American? It means no drinking, okay? Because there was a movement called temperance. By the way, politics makes strange bedfellows. You know who led the temperance movement? Conservative Christians and feminists, okay? Very strange, right? But that's in the days when feminists thought the family was actually important, right? Okay, now, I really wish, now, I teach at HBO and I actually don't drink because I'm crazy enough already, okay? The Bible doesn't tell you you can't drink, okay? I really wish that the people that fought for the, and you know, they did, especially the women that were fighting for temperance, were trying to save the family from husbands that were getting drunk and destroying their family. I mean, I understand. I think they made the wrong decision. You know what they should have done? If they were trying to fight alcohol destroying families, they should have listened to the man you listened to last year. Were you all here last year? You got to meet and hear from Thomas Jefferson, okay? Let me tell you something that a lot of people don't know about Thomas Jefferson. One of the things he tried to foster in our country was a wine culture. I don't mean wine, that's today's culture, okay? A W-I-N-E, a wine culture, bringing good grapes from France and places like that because he wanted to sponsor the drinking of wine. Now, in one reason he did that, because it's sophisticated and all that stuff. He understood the health benefits of wine. But the other reason, and it's in his letters if you read them carefully, he wanted to foster wine to stop people drinking so much gin and vodka and what we call hard distilled liquors. Because what destroys people and makes alcoholics is not usually wine and beer, but hard alcohol, gin and all those things that you drink to get drunk quickly. And so Thomas Jefferson, being very much a classicist, understood true temperance. It doesn't mean drinking at all. It means holding it in the proper balance. You drink one glass of wine with dinner or something. Those people often tend to be more family-oriented, more relaxed, more calm, more temperate, in fact. If you can just drink one or two glasses and that's it, that shows a kind of temperance. Again, if you look at, just Google it, you'll see a lot of things from Jefferson's letter where he explained why wine is a good culture. All right, let's move on to wisdom. According to the Bible, the wisest man who ever lived was Solomon, right? Now, what was Solomon's wisdom? Listen, folks, we live in Houston. Solomon was not a rocket scientist, okay? Unfortunately, we have forgotten what wisdom means. So many people in America think wisdom means being a specialist, right? A rocket scientist, whatever it happens to be. I don't want to make fun of rocket scientists. But the point is that we've got this new idea that's very, very new, that wisdom consists in having some real specialized knowledge about this or that. That is not what wisdom has meant throughout most of human history. The best definition for wisdom is a beautiful King James word, discernment. That's what Solomon had. Solomon was not a specialist. Solomon had the discernment, the proverbial wisdom, the experience to distinguish the fine shades of difference between good and bad, virtue and vice, black and white. He could understand those shades of difference because he looked to experience. One of the greatest changes in our country, and it's been a bad change, is that we've moved away from the wisdom of age and looked only at hotshot specialists. And this even happens in the political realm. All we want are pundits and people like that have little narrow knowledge, and we no longer look to the people that have a breadth and depth of wisdom based on experience and based on virtue. Right? So, wisdom, remember this, you might have heard this before, and I have been unable to find out who originated this phrase, but it's a great phrase. The builders of the Titanic were all experts. Noah was an amateur. We should remember that, okay? That wisdom, again, we do need specialists. If there's something wrong with my eye, I want to go to an eye specialist. But one of the things that has destroyed academia, and Bob Stacy and I are very similar to this, Bob Stacy is one of the people that fought hard to change our major from political science to government. Why did we do that? It's not just a word distinction. Political science suggests that political science is a social science. It belongs in the humanities. Real wisdom comes in those who have studied literature, history, philosophy, theology, the arts, and music, and tries to put those together and understand fully what it means to be human. We have lost that kind of humanistic wisdom, and all we want are facts and figures and statistics. Right? We need to move away. We have to stop being mesmerized by statistics and start understanding again the human heart and understanding virtue. Now, there's a great moment in the book, and this is one of the few great lines that is left out of the movie, because the movies are very good, but they left this out, and this, you don't even have to read the book to understand this. All right, there is a good magician named Gandalf the Grey, and he's going to meet Saruman the White, who used to be good, but he's gone over to the dark side and sold out to the bad guy, given up his virtue for power. And there's a great scene where Gandalf the Grey comes to meet his one-time mentor, and he says, "Hail, Saruman the White." And Saruman says, "I am no longer Saruman the White. I am now Saruman of many colors." And Gandalf says, "I preferred white." And Saruman says, "White! White will do as a beginning. The white cloth can be dyed. The white light can be broken, the white page can be written on. In which case, Gandalf replies, it is no longer white. And he who breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. Right? We have moved into an age where, to use a line from Wordsworth, we murder to dissect. We break everything. We cut everything down. We use cynicism and skepticism. One of the terrible things that happened to the university over the last couple hundred years is we now believe that the more educated you get, the closer you get to the PhD, the more cynical and skeptical you should become. That is grotesque, okay? That is not what we teach our students. We teach them that the smarter you get, the more joy, the more humility, the more awe and wonder. That's where wisdom comes from. In fact, it begins with wonder. That's what, how 5 minutes? Less, what? Okay, let me one quick thing here. So, again, we need to have a kind of wisdom that draws together, not that breaks apart. And what about justice? Justice is not a synonym for fairness. Fairness is a concern of adolescent children and certain politicians I won't mention, okay? Fairness means treating everybody exactly the same. That is not what justice means. Now, we all have equal dignity and worth, and we should treat all people with equal dignity as ends in themselves. But justice does not mean treating everybody the same. It means treating them in the way that they should be treated, right? One of the ways I can show you a big change, when I was younger, when I was a college student, you would call a man a sexist if he treated men and women exactly the same. That's a sexist because he doesn't understand. Men and women are different and you should treat them in different ways with different kinds of respect. Not today. Today you're a sexist if you don't treat men and women exactly the same. And if you just contemplate on that this week, you'll see the difference. We've lost a big picture sense of justice, of treating people in the right way, of understanding where we are in that. Okay? But I want to end here with something that I hope will encourage you. This comes from the movie version of Lord of the Rings, and it's cobbled together from the book, so they're not making anything up. But I want to end with something that I hope you will find very inspiring. Towards the end of the second movie, everything seems to be going bad, and Frodo, who's carrying the ring and has this terrible weight, he finally turns to his friend Sam, his gardener Sam, and says, "Sam, I can't do this anymore." And then Sam responds with words that I think we need to hear today. He says these words, "I know, it's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here. But we are. It's like in the great stories, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were, and sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be good? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But now, I think I understand. In the end, the darkness is just a passing thing. Even darkness will pass. A new dawn will rise, and when the sun shines, it will shine the clearer. Those are the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. You see, folks in those stories had plenty of chances to go back, only they didn't. They kept on going because they were holding on to something. And you might ask me, what were they holding on to? That there is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. There are going to be some ugly days ahead. Tuesday is probably going to be an ugly day, okay? But we need to hold on There is incredible good left in this country. There are groups that are trying to educate children in a way to free their minds. That's what liberal arts really means, to free their mind. Don't give in to despair. Don't give in to the naysayers. Press on, strengthen the virtue in yourself, and then strengthen it in your children and grandchildren. Because there is good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. Thank you all.